All right, so we go from radical equations, and that was yesterday, to today's topic. So today is equations with exponents. Not radical equations, equations with exponents. So take your green there. And what are these? These are, for us, where the variable is squared. Now, when you guys get older and have a little bit more complex problems, you'll have cubed and fourth power, etc. But right now, we're just worrying about things squared. So our equations with exponents, the variable is going to be squared. Technically, that's called quadratic. You don't need to remember that. When you get to Algebra 2, we'll talk a lot about quadratics. And I'll teach you an aspect of the squared part in a minute. All right, so let's remember. Remember, square roots undo squares. Yesterday's lesson, right? Not yesterday's homework. I talked about this yesterday when I also said squares undo square roots, right? Squares undo the square roots, that's the homework last night. Square roots undo squares, that's the homework tonight. Okay? The difference in the two things. So again, here was the analogy. I had an x squared. How do I get to the x? I take the square root of it, right? That should have been black. What's the square root of x squared? It's x. Right? A square root undoes a squared, and I get to the base. That's what I want. Because remember, to solve any equation is to isolate the variable. We got to get to that variable to isolate it. That's today's lesson, and that's the concept. All right. Here's one other thing that you have to be careful about with this type of situation. Because the variable ends up in the radicand, you're taking the square root of it. The solution is plus minus. There's two parts to the solution. The positive part and the negative part. And here's a key concept, and you don't have to remember it, but it'd be great if you did. We'll deal a lot with this more in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. But because the variable is squared with a 2, there are up to 2 solutions for this type of problem. Guess what? If the variable were cubed, how many solutions do you think there are up to? 3. If the variable was the fourth power, how many possible solutions are there? 4. If you had x to the 10th power, guess how many things could possibly solve that equation? 10. As many solutions as the power of the variable. Again, we'll talk a lot more about that in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, especially Algebra 2, but that is a main concept and a key concept. All right, so let's look at the aspect. Here's your original here on the left. You don't need to box it. I'm just trying to focus your attention. So you got the x squared equals 4. How would you go about solving that? You would square root the left side, and now put your black 4 there, and take your red square root. And by the way, try to leave yourself a little room. I should have warned you ahead of time. Take the square root of the right, and listen. This is the key. Whenever you do that square root symbol, you got to do the plus minus in front of it. You got to. Because if not, you're only going to give one of the 2 solutions. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So now we end up with x equals plus minus 2. That's usually how we're going to write our answer. Can I tell you what it means? You don't need to write this. You can if you want. What does this mean? This means x equals 2. Also, x equals negative 2. That's what it means. There are 2 solutions. Go back to the original equation in the purple box, right? If I put a 2 in for the x, doesn't 2 squared equal 4? Doesn't it work? What if I put a negative 2 in for the x? What's a negative 2 times a negative 2? Positive 4, right? Doesn't it work as well? See, two things work. John, can you close the door for us? Two things work. There are two solutions. So look, if you're solving a problem like this, you only want to give one of the two solutions, you're going to lose a bunch of the points off that problem because you're not given all the solutions. So be careful. Students tend to forget that plus minus. They tend to forget, and you don't want to do that. It's when you take the square root of both sides. When you take the square root of both sides. I always put it there right away, right there in the beginning, so I don't forget it. Do you think students often forget the plus minus? Say it out loud. What do you think? Yes or no? Yeah. Yeah. Don't be one of those students, okay? Because again, you're only going to get half the answer, and that's not going to be good enough. Okay? All right, so let's learn the methodology. Here it is in a nutshell. Hey, it's going to be something familiar because math makes sense. How do you do a problem where the variable is squared? Well, isolate the variable with its exponent. In other words, isolate the variable squared. Get the variable squared all by itself on one side of the equal sign. We can do that. Once the squared variable is isolated, now you're ready to take the square root of both sides. What goes in the last blank on that line? Say it if you know it. Say it if you know it. Don't forget the plus minus, all right? Remember the plus minus, folks. Remember the plus minus. And then how would you finish? Somebody raise your hand. What would number 3 be? How would you finish this? Sam? Then isolate the variable. Sometimes it's already isolated and you're done at step 2. More complicated ones, you've got a step 3 to finish. Hey, math's orderly. Really going right along with what we did yesterday. You know what we did yesterday? We isolated the radical, right, with the variable. Then we squared both sides, and then we isolated the variable. This one, we isolate the variable with its power, take the square root of both sides, don't forget the plus minus, and then if the variable's not isolated yet, finish by isolating the variable. Nice and orderly. And guess how we're going to move stuff? Things added to the variable will move by adding their opposite of both sides, and things multiplied times the variable will move by multiplying both sides by the reciprocal, and sometimes take the shortcut by dividing, right? Piece of cake, because math's nice and orderly. All right, so let's do some problems. Here I've got A and B there for you. Here I got to get rid of this so I can go high enough for me and for you guys here in class. So let's take a look at A. All right, so A, you approach this problem and you say to yourself, self, I have to isolate the n squared. And self says, what does self say? Look at A. What does self say? You got to isolate the n squared. What does self say? Okay. Self says it's already isolated, right? Nothing to move. Do you agree? There's nothing to move? Okay, so that's done. Easy problem. Now the next step is take the square root of both sides. And what am I going to remember? Yeah, again, I should have put that 9 a little bit further away to make it easier to do it off the original. All right, somebody raise your hand. Tell me, what is the square root of n squared? Square root of n squared. Blake? It is n because Blake says, that should be black, doesn't matter, because square roots undo squares, don't they? And that square root symbol, that red square root, wiped out that green squared. And what's left? The black n, right? And we all know what the square root of 9 is. It is, and right, this case, we're not going to forget the plus minus because there are two answers. Plus 3 makes the variable, solves the equation to where it's true, and -3 solves the equation to where it's true. All right, we're done. By the way, finish your quiz, finish your test, go back and check your answers. But finish first because you don't want to run out of time getting all the problems. Can't check right now, you got to check later. All right, B. Somebody tell me what to do first on B. Raquel, tell me what to add to both sides. Tell me what. Add a +4 to both sides. I agree. Raquel says we got to isolate the squared term. I got to move that -4. Hey, little trick here. I give myself room when I write the next number. So I'm going to write that 25 a little bit away from my equal sign. Byron, what do you want to do next? Not square it. Take the square root. And Ashton, what am I going to remember to write? Don't forget the plus minus, right? All right, so Hector, what's the square root of x squared? It is x, right? Square roots undo squares. And we all know the square root of 25 is 5, so we end up with x equals +5, x equals -5. Hey, these aren't hard, are they? They're not hard. They're not hard. Everyone's a little different, so you got to think, but they're not hard. So you get to a problem like C. And here's what should be in your brain right now. You just look at C, and your brain should say, I need to isolate the y squared. That's what your brain should be saying. How are we going to do it? Cole, how would you go about isolating the y squared? What do you want to do to this one? Okay, so just like that. Good to go. Do the same thing to the other side. Right, we're going to divide both sides by 4, right? That's going to move that 4. Cole correctly assessed the 4 is multiplied times our variable. And we're going to have to move by multiplying by the reciprocal. Again, shortcut. And we can use the divide by 4. My left side is now y squared. And again, I'm going to give myself room. My right side is 4. Right side is 4. What's next? Natalie, what should I do next? Okay, so again, terminology, I know you know what to mean, but Natalie, if I squared it, I would do that. Square root, correct. So I'm going to square root both sides. And Antonio, what am I going to remember to do when I square root both sides? What am I not going to forget to do? Not going to forget the plus minus, right? Don't forget the. Hey, after all this, do you think people are still going to forget the plus minus? Yeah, it's like, ah. All right, unfortunately, after I keep emphasizing it over and over and over again, unfortunately, some will still forget. Hopefully, it won't be you. And we're done. X, y equals 2, y equals -2. Hey, we had a squared variable. Remember, there are up to 2 answers, and we got 2 answers. All right, so we're progressing, right? They're getting a little bit more complicated each time. So now we get to D. Now we get to D. Blake, what would you like to do first with D? All right, Blake learned from yesterday when things are both added to and multiplied times a variable, he's going to move things added first. So he's going to add the opposite of a +5. That's a -5 to both sides. That leaves me a 3x squared on the left, right? And on the right, that leaves me a 75. Do you agree? What is next? Byron, what do you want to do next? All right, Byron says I got to move that 3 away from the x squared. I'm going to divide both sides by 3. Good assessment. Again, I'm going to be careful and leave myself room. Devin, what do I do next? Take the square root of both sides. I agree. Just like that? Is that all I want to do? All right, don't forget the plus minus. And on this one, we end up with x equals plus or minus 5. Let me pause for a second, just prove to you that the answers are both correct. All right, don't write this, but just watch. Look at the original right here, right? If the x is a positive 5, 5 squared is 25. 3 times 25 is 75. 75 plus 5 is 80. Works, doesn't it? Did you follow? All right, see if you can follow on the second one. If the x squared is a negative 5, what's negative 5 times negative 5? 25. What's 25 times 3? 75. What's 75 plus 5? See how it worked? Okay, both answers work. Both are the solution. All right? Get rid of that. Let's go to our second page here. All right, you guys are learning lots of new things, roots and radicals, so you may not remember. So I say remember, you can't take an even root. What are even roots? Even roots are things within, I'm going to squeeze this up top. I think you guys have room up top. Index of 2. By the way, what's the index of a square root? Say it if you know it. What's the index of a square root? Oh, we are forgetting. All right, don't do anything right now. Just look. Don't do anything. Is that a square root of x? Yes or no? Yes. What is the term for everything under the radical sign? Say it if you know it. Radicand. The symbol itself, though you want to say a square root, is really a radical sign. The reason this is a square root is the index, which is not shown, is a 2. Square roots have an even index. Could have a fourth root, even index. You'd have to show the 4 there. Anything other than a 2, you got to show. Cube root, you got to show the 3. That would be an odd one, though. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, etc., etc. Any even index is what we're talking about for an even root. So remember, you can't take an even index of a negative radicand. You can't take an even index, an even root of a negative radicand. So this gets us to the end like yesterday, right? I'm at n squared equals negative 25. As soon as I see that the variable squared is isolated, if I see a negative on the other side, I stop and say, no real solution. All right, so somebody said no solution earlier, and that's not true. There is no real solution. So don't write this, just watch for a second, okay? If I didn't catch this, and I tried to do this, don't write anything. What's the square root of negative 25? No, negative what? 5? A negative 5 times a negative 5 is a what? Positive 25. Is a positive 25 the radicand? Is a positive 25 the radicand? No, it's a negative 25. Negative 5 doesn't work. You could try positive 5. What's a positive 5 times a positive 5? Positive 25. That doesn't work either. That doesn't give us a negative 25 radicand. There is nothing, no real number, our real number system, that gives you a negative radicand. Now, we'll tell you this. In Algebra 2, we're going to learn another number system. They're not the real numbers. We're going to do imaginary numbers. If you really want to know the answer to this question, don't write it. But here's really the answer. plus or minus 5i. So that's for all you curious people. So when somebody on their homework writes no solution, is it really true? No. There really is a solution. It's plus or minus 5i, imaginary number. But that's not a real number. It's not part of our real number system. It's part of the imaginary number system. You might say, well, I can imagine any answer I want then. No, it's not that type of imaginary number. We'll get to those in Algebra 2, so you got to hang on. So again, that's why you can't say no solution. You say no real solution, meaning no real number solution, right? They are different. Let's try a couple more problems. So again, you get to a problem like B. You go to isolate your squared term by adding a negative 18 to both sides, right? Should be black. At that point, you get x squared equals negative 16. Do you waste any more brain power? Do you waste any more time? You do not. You stop. Don't take the square root of both sides. You can't. The quantity on the other side is negative. You stop and say, no real solution. And that's it. You're done. This is all you can do right now. Algebra 2, you'll say plus or minus 4i, but we're not there yet. All right. So that is the actual solution. I didn't want to say real solution. It's the actual solution. But again, you're not ready for those yet. All right, number 5. We finish off here. 5 is a little bit tricky. Take note of how to solve this type. This is a horse of a different color. So I'm going to go a little fast here for time's sake. Notice this. Don't write this because you'll just muddy the notes. Notice these parentheses, and it is the parentheses that's squared, correct? So isn't the base the x plus the 3? That's different than this. Those are two different things. The bottom one, we'd be doing them just like we did before. The top, guess what? The variable squared is already isolated. We are now ready to take the square root of both sides on this type. What can I not forget? Plus minus. Can somebody tell me what the left-hand side becomes? What is the square root of the quantity x plus 2 squared? Raquel? No, left side. Left is the left. Ashton? Alex. It is an x plus 3 because Alex said the red square root undoes the green square, doesn't it? What's left? X plus 3, sorry. No wonder you guys are looking funny. Right? The x plus 3 is left. Is it not? Doesn't the red square root undo the green squared? It does. And Raquel, the right side is plus minus 11, right? Everybody okay with that? Notice how you finish this type. I'm going to take my red and put a little dotted line because you got to finish these a little different. You have to make, and I'm in red here, you have to make the two equations. That's what you have to do next. So come to your left, do your x plus 3 and equals, and just for emphasis sake, just for clarity's sake, I'm going to put the plus 11. There's one of the two equations. And next to it, I'm going to go x plus 3 equals, what am I going to say next? Negative 11, right? I'm going to do the other possibility. That's how these end up. Okay, let's solve the one on the left. Add a negative 3 to both sides, right? X equals, man, I keep hitting the purple instead of the black. X equals 8. Hey, if we had time, I'd show you how 8 works in the original equation, and it does. 8 will work. Notice the right-hand side, though. We're still going to add a negative 3 to both sides, right, to move the 3? And you know what? The right ends up x equals negative 14. And look, when you got time, stick the negative 14 in. Here, I'll do it real quick. At the original, What's negative 14 plus 3? Say it if you know it. Negative 14 plus 3. Negative 11. What's negative 11 times negative 11? 121 equals 121. Works, doesn't it? Let's use the 8. 8 plus 3 is what?
11.
What's 11 squared? 121 equals 121, doesn't it? There's two solutions. A little bit more complex problem. The two solutions are actually different numbers. Not a problem. They both make the left side equal the right side. All right, B. Uh-oh. What should you do first on B? Somebody raise your hand and tell me what to do first on B. Gabe?
Subtract 4.
Excellent. Gabe says I got to isolate the square term. I'm going to move my 4 by adding a negative 4 to both sides. What's left on the left? 2n minus 3 quantity squared equals, give yourself some space, 53, up 51. Actually 49, right? Trying to go too fast. Time's sake, right? 53 minus 4, 49. Everybody with me? Okay. Time's sake, I'm now ready to square both sides, right? And I'm not going to forget the plus minus. Hey, Lauren, can you tell me what the left becomes?
2n minus 3.
Awesome, right? Do you agree? Square roots undo squares. And the right is plus minus 7. And now don't forget, we've got to write how many equations to get the two answers? So we got to go 2n minus 3 equals the positive 7. And we got to go 2n minus 3 equals the negative 7. We don't have time to finish, but trust me, the left will be 5 and the right will be negative 2 when you finish those. By the way, to finish these, aren't we going to have to isolate the variable? Don't we have to move the negative 3 first, add its opposite, and then don't we have to move the 2? Divide both sides by 2, right? A little bit more involved, but we know how to do that stuff. All right, let me get this last thought. Sometimes the solution will still contain a radical. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. So watch real fast. Isolate the square term. Let's divide both sides by 5, right? What do I have left on the left? Y squared. Give yourself some space. What do I have left on the right? 10. Agreed?
Yep.
Ready to square both sides, right? Square root both sides. Now I did it. Square root of y squared, square root of 10. Don't forget the plus minus. Y equals. We don't know the square root of 10, do we? We know the square root of 9 is 3, so this has to be a little bigger than 3, right? Do I want a decimal round off, you decimal people? No, we don't like round offs. We only use them when we have to. I want an exact answer, and the square root of 10 is an exact answer, and I leave my answer plus minus the square root of 10. It's an exact answer. Now, if you were doing a homework section, it said find the value, you'd have to use your calculator, right? Punch in 10, square root button. All right, your homework's listed. If you need, hey, pause 1 second. If you guys need it, all the videos for this chapter are on HCS Math Class. If you need to, go back and watch them over the weekend. Sometimes if you go back, it'll sink in a little better. All right? There's the homework. Hope you have a good weekend.